My name is Grace Clark, and today we're going to be talking about communication, specifically effective communication. Now, communication is a process through which messages are exchanged between people. Communication is a continuing process with no clear beginning or end. We are constantly and simultaneously sending and receiving messages to each other. It starts with the sender, and that's generally the person who initiates the process of communication. And then the message they're trying to convey is encoded. This is through words, symbols, gestures, like I'm doing right now. The medium is the method of communication, so that could be oral communication, written communication, body language, or visual communication, like this video. The recipient or receiver, that is the person who is being communicated to, and so they're trying to receive the message. And once they receive that message, they then start to decode it, and so that's kind of their interpretation of the message. And then it generally ends, although it doesn't really end, through feedback, and that is the reaction or response of the recipient of the message. There are three general definitions of communication. There's interpersonal, and that's when we talk to ourselves in our head. You know, that's kind of talk you through things, you know, so that's just all internally. And then there's interpersonal communication, that's person to person, and then person to group. So obviously that's a person to a group of people, such as a presentation or some kind of meeting, you know, where one person is talking to a group or crowd of people. The chapter also discusses a fourth category, and that's official communications, and that is like department to department or department to the rest of the department internally through like a memo or even like a press conference. It's very official. It could also be, for example, like you know, like written policy. You know, that's official communication to the employees of the company. Now, there's a great kind of example of how all these can kind of work together. In Irving, Texas in 2018, there was a man who 911 was called. He was on a bridge, he was suicidal, and the officers were actually able to talk him down and save his life, and then the department very publicly honored them for their ability to do that. So that's a kind of a great example of how interpersonal communication can help save the day, so to speak. And then, of course, the official communication to the community, that's another great example of how communication can kind of build bridges. And I actually have that video linked in case you want to view it. Now let's talk a little bit more about the different avenues of communication. So verbal communication is the use of words to convey meaning. So that could be written or just words. But the thing about words is, without context, they're generally meaningless. So you have to keep in mind the context of what you're trying to convey and carefully choose your words. So if you are in a formal setting and you use slang like y'all, you know, that can kind of set a different sort of precedent to what the person you're sending the message, how they might receive that. They might not view it as very professional. So you kind of have to be careful about the words you use, and you know, the sloppier your words are, the sloppier they will view you, you know, to put it simply. Now the next one is nonverbal communication, and this concept can be divided into about three subgroups. There's the paralanguage, that's vocal characteristics such as your tone or how fast you're talking, your tempo, you know, the rate of speed. You know, it may convey different things. So if you talk slower, it imparts a sense of calmness, you know, just kind of keeps it steady. Or if you talk really fast, it says that there's exciting, you know, so it just kind of, it helps convey meaning more. So if you say, oh yeah, I'm fine, but you're really like, oh yeah, I'm fine, you know, obviously you don't seem fine. So, you know, it really tells a lot about what you're saying. It can kind of betray what you're really meaning versus what you're saying. The same goes with body language, and that's also known as kinesics. There's a research study that's often cited by Mehrabian in 1967 he stated that body language makes up at least 55% of all communication. So obviously your body language is very important. If your mouth is saying one thing but your body's saying another, that can kind of betray what you're actually thinking versus what you're saying. So, you can look for tells in how people are acting versus what they're saying. You can tell if they're lying or, just things like that. So, if they're saying, oh, I'm so sorry for you, but their body language is like smiling or laughing, obviously what they're saying isn't really what they're conveying. And then last, of course, there's proxemics, and that's how close, we are to each other when we talk. So, in Western society, it's generally referred to as our bubble, and if you cross into my bubble, that really says a lot about, whatever message you're trying to convey. It can be very intimidating, or it can be well received, if it's, like, say, for example, your spouse or your child comes and gives you a hug, that's totally fine, that's not an issue. But if someone off the street does, then, there's a problem. So it can kind of really change the dynamic of the situation. Then there's the socially acceptable, just talking with a group of people, and that distance is about 4 to 12 feet, it just kind of depends. Obviously, the closer you are, the more intimate it is, and therefore it can be kind of a, also intimidating depending on the situation. Now in public, this distance is generally anywhere more than 12 feet. So, that would be, say, like a speaker talking to a crowd. That's generally more than 12 feet. So if you infringe on these rules, that can create a problematic situation, So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're talking with members of the public. You don't want to be up in their face. You want to give them their distance, keep everybody calm, keep everybody feeling respected, And another example of nonverbal communication is symbolic cues. So, when you see an officer with the badge and, the jacket and everything, you think, oh, okay, they're a person in authority. They're here to help us out on the situation. But it could also be a negative, because that would be a positive, and then there could be a negative. If it's a community that doesn't have a great relationship with police, that automatically creates a barrier to effective communication. So you really need to keep that in mind when you're talking to people, how they could perceive what you're saying. If you have, like, strong body language and you're very blunt, that can kind of create a bit of a awkward situation. So you have to kind of watch out for those kinds of things. And in the textbook, of course, it talks about how some departments are trying to counteract that viewpoint, and they have their officers in blazers just to try and soften the overall kind of look and perception. Other barriers can be prejudice. That's a very large barrier to effective communication. If you have a prejudice towards anything really, but let's say like a group of people, like let's just, for example, say drug addicts. If you're talking to someone and you're saying, I just do not understand drug addicts, they just need to get their act together, they should just go and be fine, but you don't know, what if the person you're talking to, what if they have an issue with drugs, or have a family member, or even worse, someone they know have passed. And so you really have to keep in mind what you're saying, how it could be being received, because you really don't know. And of course, there's racial prejudice, so you really have to, keep that in mind between different parties, so choose your words carefully and do not put out a bad image, because that's just ends effective communication. It totally breaks it down. Another example of negative communication is scapegoating, That's just putting all the energy towards negative, unwanted attention, energy against a particular group or person. And that can kind of go into the more profiling and different awkward situations that just really are not positive at all. And you really want to avoid that. You want, whoever is responsible to be held accountable, but you don't want to just say, all right, this guy works, just there we go, and that's with any situation, even interpersonally with, your home life, you don't want to do that. So obviously in official capacity, you really don't want to. So, that's a bit of an extreme example, but that, so hopefully that kind of gives you a better idea of communication, how to better communicate, you know. Just keep in mind how your body language is making people feel, you know. If I'm just arms crossed and I'm looking like this and I'm like, oh yeah, I totally care about what you have to say, and then I roll my eyes, you know, obviously you're demonstrating you don't really care, even though you are verbally saying you do. So that's kind of example of what I'm talking about here. So hopefully this will kind of give you some points, tips, ideas of how to go forward. Thank you for watching.